David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Can I just acknowledge the comment from the Speaker we've just heard from Jacinda Ardern? I think in the context of what we're talking about here, that there is a discussion to be had about age in terms of offending. The age that wasn't mentioned is that students, in terms of eligibility for student support, the age of 25, I think, one still considers the income of their parents as part of the criteria. So we've got an age range virtually from 12 or 14 to 25, and that does seem peculiar. Presumably the 16, I mean, we've got age of consent. It is difficult because between 16 and 18, often there is a significant development in young people. They do move from just almost from childhood to adulthood in those few years. So that's probably a debate worth having. In the context of part 2 of the present bill we're looking at, we do, as I say, the Greens do support this inclusion, this specific reference to this offending. The notion that improper or indecent communication with a young person should be captured within the legislation. And the example given in some of the conversations that it may not necessarily, it may be for purely nefarious reasons, an individual's gratification. They seek to address a young child, to expose them to pornography or whatever it is. And I think we need to be aware too of the more general harm that can be done, and there's lots of evidence emerging, research findings that are pointing to the significant harm that can be caused to young people who are exposed at an early age to pornography. It is pervasive, it is much more accessible than it has been in previous years, I guess. We know from the research that young people who are routinely exposed to pornography at young ages often have trouble developing relationships in later life, including sexual relationships, but not only those. Their expectation about what is normal sexual behaviour between consenting couples is also sadly skewed. There is a lot of significant psychological and, by extension, physical harm that can be done to children simply through excessive and excessively early exposure to pornography. So I think it's appropriate that we do seek to put some boundaries around this, having acknowledged the rather inconsistent approach we take to ages. Yeah, I'll leave that. But the other part of this bill, significant part, of course, is this question of a constable who may become this fictitious young person. Again, the example given that if parents of a child of 12, 14, whatever, discover that they're being exposed to some sort of approach online, that they can then inform police and have somebody essentially pick up where that left off and to just see how far this individual is going. Does it step across the line, and is it something that ought to be prosecuted in this way? There are issues about entrapment, or potential issues about entrapment, but I think we were given some comfort in the conversation at the Select Committee level that the police force and other agencies are very aware of the boundaries around entrapment, and while this is a new environment, the principles of that do carry over. It's in nobody's interest for them to go out and try and stimulate this sort of behaviour, to endeavour to get people to initiate this sort of behaviour, but certainly where it exists, I think it's entirely appropriate that these provisions should be there to enable police or other agencies to intervene, to just establish the boundaries of the offending and to respond appropriately. There were some concerns about this language about a reasonable, people making taking reasonable steps to determine the age of a person they're communicating with. Reasonable steps to determine if they were above the age of 16 and who might believe them to be on reasonable grounds. Again, these terms are not defined clearly in this legislation, but there is a body of case law, this notion of reasonableness. It's subject to context, it's subject to the time, place and situation. And again, I think that we're wise simply to let it lie as it is, to trust in the discretion of the of the agencies and indeed of the judiciary to establish whether somebody might, in a particular instance, have reasonably and genuinely thought that a person was 18, 20 years old or whatever, when in fact they were only 13 or 14. So with those few comments, I just continue to say we support this legislation, and as we have indicated, we support the SOP from the Minister.
So the question is that the Minister's amendment set out on SOP number 67 are agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. The contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. Question now is that part 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. The contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. The question is now that clause 1 stand part. Those who are of that opinion will say aye. The contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. The question now is that clause 2 stand part. Those who are of that opinion will say aye. The contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. I understand the Minister has something to move.
I move supplementary order paper number 483, dividing the bill.
The question is that motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. The contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill with amendment.